Europe in 1914 resembled a powder keg with a smoldering fuse. Decades of escalating contradictions between the great powers had reached a critical point. On the continent's map, Eastern Poland became the very spark that would soon ignite the flames of an unprecedented military conflict. The Russian Empire and Germany, two colossal powers, stood opposite each other, separated only by a conditional borderline and mutual distrust. Their armies, like predators before a fight, froze in anticipation of the signal to attack. The German General Staff was finalizing the last preparations for the Schlieffen Plan, while the Russian command was accelerating the mobilization of its troops. In the border Polish villages, local residents anxiously watched the movement of military units. Each day brought new rumors and fears. The air hummed with tension, and in the headquarters of both empires, military strategists bent over maps, calculating future maneuvers. No one yet knew that very soon, these lands would become the arena of the fiercest clashes, which would forever change the course of history and leave an indelible mark on the memory of three nations. The dawn of August 2nd, 1914, illuminated the East Polish forests and fields with an alarming crimson glow. The silence was broken by a lone shot from a border patrol, the first note in the symphony of the approaching war. By noon, scattered skirmishes had escalated into organized artillery shelling. German advance units, acting according to a meticulously developed plan, began a methodical push deep into the territory. Russian border outposts bore the brunt of the initial assault, desperately holding back the onslaught of superior enemy forces. In the headquarters of the Russian army, there was a tense flurry of activity. General Rennenkampf, commander of the First Army, bent over a map, issued orders for the urgent transfer of reserves. "The Germans are acting atypically," he remarked to his officers. "They avoid frontal clashes, preferring outflanking maneuvers." Indeed, from the very first hours of the confrontation, the German command had placed its bets on mobility and tactical flexibility. On August 3rd, the first major engagement took place near Suwałki. A German cavalry division unexpectedly attacked Russian positions from the flank, creating a threat of encirclement. The Russians had to hastily regroup, withdrawing troops to more advantageous lines. This maneuver, though forced, prevented a rout and laid the groundwork for a future counterattack. A distinctive feature of these early battles was the active use of reconnaissance groups by both sides. Small detachments infiltrated enemy rear areas, gathering valuable intelligence and disrupting communications. Polish peasants, caught between two fires, watched this deadly game of hide and seek with horror. Many of them were forced to abandon their homes, joining the stream of refugees. By the end of August 4, the line of contact between the troops stretched for tens of kilometers. The Germans, employing a pincer tactic, sought to envelop Russian positions from the north and south. The Russian command, realizing the enemy's design, began concentrating forces in threatened directions. A tense struggle for key heights and river crossings ensued. August 5th was marked by the first use of heavy artillery by the Germans. Powerful guns unleashed a barrage of fire on Russian positions near Augustów. The ground trembled from the explosions, the air filled with smoke and the smell of gunpowder. However, the Russian infantry, entrenched in the wooded terrain, managed to withstand this blow and even conduct a successful counterattack, capturing several German guns. By August 6th, it became clear that the initial phase of the confrontation had brought no decisive success to either side. Both armies, having tested each other's strength, proceeded to more thorough preparations for large-scale operations. Additional divisions were transferred, field hospitals were deployed, and supply lines were established. The August forests and fields transformed into a giant chessboard, where every move could have a decisive impact on the outcome of the entire campaign. In August 1914, Eastern Poland became the arena for a clash between two military colossi, the Russian and German empires. Beneath the outward chaos of the fighting lay meticulously calculated strategic plans of both sides. For the Russian command, this region represented the key to further advance into East Prussia. General Zielinski, who commanded the Northwestern Front, saw Eastern Poland as a springboard for a deep strike into German territories, capable of diverting significant enemy forces from the Western Front, where the fate of France hung in the balance. The German General Staff, guided by the Schlieffen Plan, initially planned defensive actions in the east. Eastern Poland was considered a buffer zone where limited forces were intended to delay the Russian offensive. However, the geographical features of the region, vast forests, numerous lakes, and marshy areas, forced German strategists to adjust their plans, opting for mobile defense and tactical counterattacks. The Augustów Forest, a huge forest massif, gained particular importance, turning traditional tactical schemes into a dangerous gamble. The Russian command expected to use its numerical superiority for frontal pressure, while the Germans relied on the mobility and better technical equipment of their units. The Neman River and the Masurian lakes formed natural defensive lines, control over which became a priority. The Russian strategy envisioned creating a powerful striking force to break through German positions, followed by developing the offensive in the direction of Königsberg. The Germans, in turn, planned a series of flanking attacks, using the railway network for rapid troop deployment. The Russian army faced the task not only of advancing deep into enemy territory, but also of maintaining control over communications, ensuring uninterrupted supply to the attacking units. The German command sought to wear down the enemy in defensive battles and then deliver a decisive counterattack against the stretched Russian communications. A significant factor was the attitude of the local population. The Russian command hoped for the support of Polish peasants, but historical grievances and fears of new repressions made these hopes illusory. The Germans, on the other hand, skillfully exploited anti-Russian sentiments, forming intelligence groups and sabotage units from local residents. Ultimately, the August battles in eastern Poland became a clash not only of armies, but also of strategic concepts. The Russian command relied on massiveness, the German on technological superiority and tactical flexibility. The geographical factor became the third participant in this confrontation, often neutralizing the advantages of both sides and requiring unconventional solutions. War is not only a clash of armies, but also a battle of human souls. In the August battles of 1914, cruelty transformed from a side effect into a tool of military art. Both sides quickly realized the psychological value of intimidation, creating an atmosphere of terror that paralyzed the enemy's will more effectively than any artillery bombardment. The German command was the first to systematically employ scorched earth tactics. Villages in the path of retreat were subjected to methodical destruction. "We leave the Russians only ashes and tears." These words of a German officer, recorded in a diary, reflected the cold calculation behind these actions. The Russian army responded with its own methods of psychological pressure. Night raids by Cossack detachments struck terror into German positions. Suddenly appearing from the darkness and disappearing just as swiftly, the Cossacks created a constant sense of danger for the enemy, depriving soldiers of the opportunity to rest and recuperate. The local population found itself hostage to this ruthless game. Poles remaining in the combat zone were suspected of espionage by both warring armies. The slightest suspicion could lead to severe punishment. When the Russians come, we are accused of helping the Germans. When the Germans return, we are accused of helping the Russians. We are always to blame. a resident of the border town of Suwałki later recalled. A special form of psychological impact was demonstrative acts of intimidation. German commanders practiced public punishments for sabotage and disobedience. Russian military leaders responded with public executions of captured saboteurs. The cycle of violence closed, generating ever new acts of retribution. War correspondents, stationed at headquarters, deliberately created an image of a ruthless enemy in their reports. "German soldiers spare not even children," Russian newspapers wrote. "Cossacks leave a trail of blood and ashes behind them," the German press echoed. These reports, often exaggerated or entirely fabricated, fueled mutual hatred and justified new atrocities. Even nature became a tool of war. Germans deliberately flooded low-lying areas, turning them into impassable swamps. Russians set forest fires to conceal the movements of their troops and disorient the enemy. The psychological consequences of the August battles proved to be as profound as the physical wounds. Many soldiers who went through this ordeal returned home with mental traumas that modern psychiatrists would call post-traumatic stress disorder. "I can no longer hear the crackling of branches in the forest. I think it's a German patrol," a Russian infantryman confessed in a letter home. The August battles of 1914 marked a turning point in military art, as a new type of warfare was born on the fields of eastern Poland. Traditional notions of linear formations and frontal clashes gave way to dynamic maneuvers and unpredictable tactical decisions. It was here, amidst the forests and lakes, that commanders on both sides began to reevaluate the very nature of modern combat. The Russian command was the first to employ the tactic of wandering batteries. Artillery crews constantly changing positions, striking German units, and disappearing before the enemy could pinpoint their location. This innovation allowed them to compensate for the technical superiority of German artillery through mobility and surprise. The Germans responded by creating mobile strike groups that operated independently from the main forces. Small detachments, reinforced with machine guns and mortars, infiltrated the rear of Russian positions, disrupted communications, and created panic among rear echelon units. "Our soldiers are like ghosts," wrote German Lieutenant Wilhelm Hoffmann in his diary. "They appear where they are not expected and disappear before the Russians can organize a defense." Cavalry played a special role in this new war, experiencing its last glorious hour. Mounted units transformed from a striking force into the eyes and ears of the army. Cossack patrols on the Russian side and Uhlan squadrons on the German side conducted constant reconnaissance, carried out swift raids into the enemy's rear, and cut communication lines. The traditional cavalry charge gave way to dispersed formations and hit-and-run tactics. A crucial innovation was the use of terrain as an active element of combat operations. The Augustovo forest became a labyrinth of ambushes and traps. Russian sappers skillfully exploited natural obstacles, reinforcing them with engineering structures. The Germans responded with tactics of controlled forest fires, which forced the enemy to abandon their cover. Communication and coordination became critical. Both sides actively used field telephones and signal flares to control troops in a rapidly changing environment. German units were the first to employ a system of coded radio messages, allowing command to react quickly to changes in the situation. This new war also demanded a new kind of soldier, proactive, capable of acting independently away from the main forces. Junior officers and non-commissioned officers were given unprecedented freedom in making tactical decisions. "Our platoon commanders today are solving tasks that yesterday were the domain of colonels," noted Russian Major General Alexeyev in a report. The maneuverability of combat operations also created new problems, primarily in the area of supply and evacuation of the wounded. Supply trains could not keep up with the rapidly moving units, forcing soldiers to live off local resources. Field hospitals were deployed in close proximity to the front line, with medical personnel working under enemy fire. August 6, 1914, was marked by the battle for the Suwałki Heights, a key foothold controlling the approaches to the Augustowo forest. At dawn, German artillery opened a massive fire on Russian positions. The ground trembled from the explosions of heavy shells, the air filled with suffocating smoke and the smell of burnt gunpowder. Under the cover of artillery preparation, German infantry advanced in an attack in 3 waves, striving to envelop the left flank of the Russian units. Lieutenant Colonel Krasnov, commanding the defense of the heights, made an unconventional decision. Instead of evenly distributing forces along the entire line, he concentrated the main power on the right flank. When the German lines approached within effective firing range, Russian machine guns opened a dagger-like fire into the flank of the advancing troops. Simultaneously, a hidden battery of field guns struck from the forest. It was a moment of truth, Staff Captain Vorontsov later recalled. The Germans lay down, but their commanders stubbornly raised the soldiers to attack. 3 times they rolled onto our positions, and 3 times they rolled back, leaving dozens of bodies on the slopes. By noon, the situation changed dramatically. The German command, realizing the futility of frontal attacks, transferred 2 fresh companies across a swampy lowland considered impassable. This maneuver caught the Russians by surprise. Suddenly, German soldiers appeared in the rear of the defenders. A fierce hand-to-hand combat ensued. The 3rd Battalion of the Novgorod Infantry Regiment, which was in reserve, played a decisive role. The battalion commander, Major Severtsev, without orders from above, threw his soldiers into a counterattack. A swift blow to the flank of the breakthrough German units restored the situation. August 17th, the day of a bloody clash near Lake Neta. The German command attempted a deep flanking maneuver of Russian positions from the north. For this, a special combat group was formed under the command of Colonel von Stein, reinforced with heavy artillery and sapper units. Russian intelligence timely detected the enemy's preparations. General Ruski transferred 2 rifle divisions and a Cossack brigade to the threatened direction. A key element of the Russian defense was a system of disguised artillery positions, arranged on the principle of circular defense. When the German columns entered the narrow passage between the lakes, Russian batteries opened crossfire. Simultaneously, Cossack hundreds attacked the stretched-out enemy convoys. The German offensive choked, turning into a chaotic retreat. August 23rd brought a decisive turning point in the August confrontation. On this day, the largest tank battle of the campaign took place, the Battle of Rajgrod. Both sides concentrated their main forces here, understanding the strategic importance of this transport hub. Behind every great battle stand individuals, commanders whose decisions determine the fates of thousands, and ordinary soldiers whose courage changes the course of history. The August battles of 1914 brought to the forefront brilliant military leaders from both sides of the conflict. From the Russian side, General Pavel Karlovich Rennenkampf, commander of the First Army, particularly stood out. A hereditary military man of Baltic origin, he possessed a rare combination of qualities: strategic thinking and personal bravery. The general who is always in front, that's what his soldiers called him, having seen Rennenkampf personally adjust artillery fire under enemy fire during critical moments of battles. His opponent was Prussian General Hermann von Francois, commander of the First Army Corps. A brilliant tactician, renowned for his ability to find weak points in the enemy's defenses. Their confrontation resembled a chess game of the highest level, where every move could cost thousands of lives. No less significant was Russian General Alexei Ermoleyevich Evert, whose coolness in critical moments saved the situation more than once. It was his decision to regroup forces in the midst of the battle for the Suwalki Heights that allowed Russian troops to hold strategic positions. On the German side, Colonel Max Hoffmann, who actually directed the operations of the 8th Army, stood out. His innovative approach to using reserves and the railway network for rapid troop deployment laid the foundations of modern mobile warfare. However, wars are won not only by generals. The exploits of ordinary soldiers often decided the outcome of individual clashes. Lieutenant Vladimir Kotlinski, with a reconnaissance platoon, found himself surrounded by superior enemy forces near the village of Rachki, and organized an all-round defense in a half-ruined church. For 2 days, without water and almost without ammunition, they held back the attacks of a German battalion, diverting significant forces from the main direction of attack. When reinforcements arrived, only 5 defenders remained alive. Corporal Hans Müller of the 2nd Bavarian Regiment showed exceptional ingenuity during the battle near Lake Netta. When his machine gun crew was destroyed by artillery fire, Müller, though wounded, managed to repair the damaged machine gun and single-handedly covered the retreat of his company, holding back the advancing Cossacks. Non-commissioned officer Semyon Budanov, commander of a sapper squad under continuous enemy fire, restored a destroyed bridge across the Bobr River, ensuring the crossing of Russian artillery at a critical moment in the battle. His engineering solution, to use damaged carts as supports, entered textbooks on military engineering. Field medics of both armies wrote a special page in history. Sister of Mercy Elizaveta Krapovitskaya, finding herself on the front line during a sudden German attack, organized the evacuation of the wounded under heavy fire. German military Dr. Johannes Weber, caught in an encirclement with a field hospital, refused to leave the seriously wounded and continued to operate when Russian troops occupied the village. His professionalism so impressed the Russian command that he was allowed to continue working as a prisoner of war doctor. The Polish population of eastern Poland in August 1914 found itself in a truly tragic situation between the hammer of the Russian army and the anvil of German troops. For the local residents, the outbreak of hostilities meant not only physical danger, but also an agonizing choice between loyalty to one of the warring parties or an attempt to remain neutral, often perceived as betrayal by both empires. Peasant farms were reduced to ruins under artillery fire, fields were trampled by marching columns, and livestock was requisitioned for the needs of the armies. When the Russians take the last cow, they give a receipt. When the Germans come, they take the receipt too. People in Polish villages joked bitterly. The situation of border settlements was particularly difficult, as they changed hands several times. Each new occupying power suspected local residents of collaborating with the enemy. Marian Kowalski, the headman of the village of Ratsky, recalled, "In the morning, a Russian officer interrogated me, demanding information about German positions. In the evening of the same day, a German lieutenant threatened to shoot me if I didn't tell him about Russian units in the area." It was in this atmosphere of fear and uncertainty that the first cells of Polish resistance began to form. Initially, they had no clear political program. Their main goal was to protect the local population from military arbitrary rule. The core of these groups consisted of former military personnel, students, and teachers, people who possessed organizational skills and a certain authority. In the forests of the Augustov primeval forest, the first partisan detachments emerged, operating on the principle of a third force. They attacked convoys of both warring parties, liberated compatriots arrested on suspicion of espionage, and created secret food depots for the starving civilian population. These scattered groups gradually established contact with each other, forming a network of mutual aid and resistance. Father Andrzej Malinowski from Suwałki set up a system of secret couriers who transmitted information between different areas of the occupied territory. Leaflets calling for Poles to unite in the face of a double threat were distributed under the guise of religious literature. By mid-August, the influence of the Polish resistance on the course of hostilities became palpable. Both warring parties were forced to allocate additional forces to guard communications and combat saboteurs. The German command even formed special anti-partisan detachments that combed the forests and carried out punitive actions in villages suspected of supporting the resistance. Polish women played a special role, becoming scouts and liaisons. Using the traditional perception of female harmlessness, they could move relatively freely between the positions of the warring armies, gathering valuable information. Jadwiga Pilsudska, a young teacher from Augustów, created an entire network of informants among the laundresses working in military hospitals of both armies. While a bloody drama unfolded on the fields of eastern Poland, the capitals of the Western powers closely followed its every act. London and Parisian newspapers daily published reports from the Eastern Front, turning distant battles into a part of the everyday lives of the English and French. The Times and Le Figaro competed in the dramatic nature of their headlines, while military observers analyzed every maneuver of Russian and German troops with the meticulousness of chess commentators. The British government showed particular interest in the August events. For London, the successes of the Russian army had not only military, but also political significance. They tied up significant German forces in the east, weakening pressure on the Western Front. Every Russian soldier who dies in the Polish forests saves the life of a British soldier in Flanders. This cynical but accurate formula of Lord Kitchener reflected the strategic calculations of the British command. The French press covered the eastern Polish battles with particular emotional intensity. The newspaper Le Matin published heartbreaking stories about Polish refugees and the heroism of Russian allies. French society, under the direct threat of German invasion, saw a ray of hope in the Eastern Front. The Russian steamroller will crush the Prussian war machine, confidently declared the influential Parisian weekly L'Illustration. However, behind the public statements of solidarity lay more complex political calculations. Secret reports from British military attachés expressed doubts about the Russian army's ability to wage a long campaign. The Russians are brave, but their supply is catastrophically poorly organized. Colonel Knox, who observed the hostilities from General Rennenkampf's headquarters, reported to London. The French government, desperately needing to alleviate German pressure, constantly demanded more active actions from Russia. The French ambassador in St. Petersburg, Maurice Paléologue, literally besieged the Russian Ministry of War, insisting on an immediate offensive along the entire front. These diplomatic efforts put additional pressure on the Russian command, forcing it to make hasty decisions. An important element of the Western reaction was intelligence activity. British and French intelligence carefully analyzed the tactical innovations that emerged in the August battles. Of particular interest were German methods of maneuver warfare and Russian experience in operations in wooded terrain. These observations were subsequently applied on the Western fronts. In the financial circles of London and Paris, the August events caused restrained optimism. Stock market analysts viewed the protracted war in the East as a factor favoring the economic interests of the Entente. Quote, noted French Finance Minister Alexandre Ribot in his diary. By the end of August 1914, a more realistic understanding of the nature of the Eastern Front had formed in the Western capitals. Initial hopes for a quick Russian victory were replaced by the understanding that a long confrontation lay ahead. Eastern Poland, from a little-known region became an important element of the Entente's strategic calculations. A place where not only the fate of Russia, but also the future of all Europe was being decided. Behind every shot and maneuver of the August battles stood an invisible yet critically important system of rear support. While the fate of battles was decided at the front lines, in the rear, an equally intense struggle was waged against logistical problems, the resolution of which determined the outcome of the entire campaign. Both warring sides faced unprecedented challenges in supplying their armies, operating in the difficult conditions of eastern Poland. The Russian Empire, possessing a numerical advantage, suffered from deficiencies in transport infrastructure. The railway network in East Polish territories had a different gauge width than the European one, which necessitated the transshipment of all supplies at border stations. This created bottlenecks and delays, critically important in the context of mobile warfare. Quartermaster services were forced to form huge horse-drawn convoys, stretching for tens of kilometers along rain-soaked roads. Colonel Ignatiev, head of rear support for the Second Army, noted in his report, "Shells reach the front faster than bread and fodder. Horses drop from exhaustion, soldiers starve for 3 days." The German army, technically better equipped, faced different problems. The rapid advance of forward units created gaps with rear services. The German command, for the first time, extensively used automotive transport to supply troops. But the quality of roads and the shortage of fuel limited the effectiveness of this solution. The supply of ammunition presented particular difficulty. The intensity of artillery duels exceeded all pre-war calculations. Russian batteries in 1 day of fighting near Suwalki expended a month's supply of shells. German artillery, using ammunition more economically, nevertheless required constant replenishment of supplies. Both sides were forced to impose strict limits on artillery support, which directly affected the tactical decisions of commanders. Medical support became another critical factor. Field hospitals could not cope with the flow of wounded, whose evacuation was complicated by impassable roads and a lack of transport. Russian military doctors showed miracles of ingenuity, using peasant huts and even barns to accommodate the wounded. The German military medical service, better equipped, nevertheless suffered from a shortage of medicines, especially painkillers. The August weather conditions, frequent rains and sharp temperature drops, exacerbated logistical problems. Roads turned into mud flows, impassable for heavy convoys. Rivers overflowed their banks, washing away temporary crossings. The quartermaster services of both armies were forced to improvise, creating alternative supply routes and using local resources. It was logistical constraints that often became the decisive factor in making strategic decisions. General Rennenkampf was forced to suspend a promising offensive on Königsberg due to stretched supply lines. The German command abandoned the plan of a deep flanking maneuver of Russian positions near Augusto, realizing the impossibility of providing such an operation with the necessary resources. The August battles became an important lesson for military strategists, demonstrating that in modern warfare, victory is achieved not only by those who fight better, but also by those who more effectively solve logistical problems. The August battles of 1914 were not only a clash of armies and strategies, but also a proving ground for the testing of the latest military technical achievements. Both warring parties sought to gain a decisive advantage by employing innovative weapons and tactical methods, many of which subsequently changed the face of military art. The German army made extensive use of 210mm heavy mortars for the first time, capable of destroying fortified positions from a distance of up to 10 kilometers. Russian fortifications, previously considered impregnable, were turned into ruins under the impact of these guns. When the German heavy artillery spoke, the earth trembled as in an earthquake, and there was such a roar in the air that it was impossible to hear the voice of a comrade standing nearby, recalled Staff Captain Vorontsov in his memoirs. The Russian command responded by introducing mobile artillery groups equipped with new 1913 model field guns. These 3-inch guns were distinguished by their high rate of fire and the ability to quickly change positions. Artillery crews moved with the infantry, providing fire support at the most critical moments of the battle. A true revolution was the widespread use of machine guns by both sides. If machine guns were previously considered an auxiliary weapon, in the August battles they became a key element of defense. German machine gun nests, skillfully camouflaged and positioned for crossfire, could hold back the advance of entire battalions. Russian machine gunners mastered the tactic of roaming firing points, constantly changing positions and avoiding retaliatory artillery fire. For the first time in the history of military conflicts, communication tools were widely used to coordinate troop actions. German units were equipped with field telephones, allowing continuous communication between headquarters and frontline units. The Russian army compensated for the lack of technical means with an extensive network of mounted messengers and signalmen using conventional light signals. Aviation, until recently considered an exotic addition to traditional branches of service, proved its effectiveness in reconnaissance. German Taube airplanes made daily sorties over Russian positions, recording troop movements and adjusting artillery fire. Russian pilots on Ilya Muromets aircraft not only conducted reconnaissance, but also made the first attempts to bomb German columns. Engineering troops from both sides used the latest achievements in fortification art. German sappers built dugouts with concrete ceilings capable of withstanding direct hits from heavy shells. Russian engineers skillfully used the terrain features, creating multi-tiered defense systems with false positions and camouflaged firing points. Special attention was paid to camouflage. German units first engaged camouflage paint for artillery pieces and uniforms. Russian troops used natural materials to conceal positions from aerial observation, creating artificial forests and imitating rural buildings. The military technical innovations of the August battles had a long-term impact on the development of military art. Many tactical methods and technical solutions tested in the forests of eastern Poland were subsequently adopted by armies around the world. The August battles became a kind of laboratory where the military art of the 20th century was born, more mobile, technologically advanced, and deadly. For Germany, the August battles in eastern Poland became a harsh lesson, forcing a re-evaluation of many military doctrines. The German command, which initially viewed the Eastern Front as a secondary theater of operations, encountered a reality that shattered many pre-war calculations. Ludendorff, analyzing the results of the campaign, wrote in his diary, "We underestimated the Russian bear. Its paw proved heavier than our strategists had anticipated." The first and perhaps most important lesson was the realization of the need to revise the Schlieffen Plan. The strategy, which envisioned a lightning defeat of France while holding actions in the East, required adjustment. The August events showed that Russia was capable of mobilizing significant forces faster than the German command had assumed. This forced the German General Staff to transfer additional divisions to the Eastern Front, weakening the strike force in the West. Tactical conclusions proved no less significant. German officers who had gone through the crucible of the East Polish battles noted the effectiveness of Russian artillery and the steadfastness of the infantry in defense. The Russian soldier dies at his position, but does not retreat without orders. This phrase from Colonel von Stein's report became a kind of warning for German commanders accustomed to quick victories. The August battles revealed weaknesses in the German war machine. The supply system, designed for short operations relying on the railway network, failed in the protracted battles in an area with underdeveloped infrastructure. Quartermaster services could not cope with supplying troops with food and ammunition along extended lines of communication. The German command drew valuable lessons from the experience of fighting in wooded and swampy terrain. The traditional tactics of massive frontal attacks proved largely ineffective in the conditions of eastern Poland. This led to the development of new combat methods for small groups, with an emphasis on firepower and maneuverability. Machine guns and mortars became the main striking force of the infantry. Special attention was paid to coordinating the actions of various branches of the armed forces. The experience of the August battles showed that success is brought not by numerical superiority, but by the coordinated interaction of infantry, artillery, and cavalry. German staffs began to develop detailed plans for joint operations, with a clear distribution of tasks among various units. An unexpected discovery for the German command was the effectiveness of Cossack raids behind enemy lines. This experience led to the creation of special mobile groups operating independently of the main forces, with the task of disrupting enemy communications. The tactic, borrowed from the enemy, was refined and adapted to German capabilities. The August battles of 1914 proved to be a harsh test for the Russian army. When the last shots faded and the cries of the attackers ceased, it was time to sum up and draw lessons. For the Russian command, the consequences of these battles were ambiguous. Tactical successes were combined with strategic miscalculations, and the heroism of the soldiers compensated for shortcomings in organization and supply. General Alexeyev, analyzing the results of the campaign, wrote in his report, "We defeated the German in the open field, but lost to him in the headquarters." This bitter self-criticism reflected the main lesson learned by the Russian General Staff: the need for a radical revision of the troop control system. The August battles demonstrated that in the conditions of maneuver warfare, the traditional vertical command structure, which required coordination of every step with higher authorities, worked too slowly. The initiative of mid-level commanders was often hampered by bureaucratic procedures, leading to missed opportunities. After the cessation of hostilities, a special commission for reforming the field management system was created at the Stavka of the Supreme Commander-in-Chief. Its recommendations led to an expansion of the powers of divisional and corps commanders, who gained the right to independently make decisions within the framework of the overall operational plan. An equally important lesson was the realization of the critical role of intelligence. During the August battles, Russian troops repeatedly encountered unexpected enemy maneuvers, which indicated the insufficient effectiveness of the intelligence service. After the campaign, the intelligence units were reorganized, the number of cavalry patrols was increased, and agent networks in the frontline zone were strengthened. Special attention was paid to the training of intelligence officers who spoke German and were familiar with the organizational features of the German army. The regrouping of Russian troops, which began at the end of August, aimed not only to restore the combat capability of the battered units, but also to create a more effective defensive system. The linear deployment of troops gave way to a deeply echeloned defense, with the allocation of mobile reserves capable of quickly responding to enemy breakthroughs. The commander of the Northwestern Front, General Ruski, wrote in his memoirs, "The August battles taught us to see the battlefield in three dimensions, not only along the front and flanks, but also in depth." Artillery underwent significant reorganization. The experience of clashes with German batteries showed the insufficient effectiveness of dispersing guns among infantry units. The process of forming artillery groups for various purposes began, from divisional support to frontline reserves. Special attention was paid to coordinating the actions of artillerymen and infantry, and new systems for targeting and adjusting fire were developed. The August battles revealed serious problems in the logistics system of the Russian army. Stretched communications, a lack of transport, bureaucratic obstacles in the distribution of supplies. All this negatively affected the combat capability of the troops. In September 1914, a large-scale reform of the quartermaster service was initiated. Intermediate ammunition and food depots were created. Special transport companies equipped with cars and field kitchens were formed. The medical service, which faced an unprecedented influx of wounded during the August battles, also underwent reorganization. Field hospitals were brought closer to the front line, the number of dressing stations was increased, and a system for evacuating seriously wounded to rear medical facilities was established. Doctors, who had gone through the crucible of the August battles, developed new methods of providing assistance for artillery and machine gun wounds, which predominated in modern warfare. The memory of the events of August 1914 in eastern Poland is deeply etched into the national consciousness of three nations, becoming a symbol that each side interprets in its own way. These interpretations are not merely different, they sometimes contradict each other, reflecting a complex mosaic of historical grievances, pride, and the desire to learn lessons from the past. For Poles, the August battles became one of the first manifestations of national resistance in an era when the Polish state existed only in the hearts of its citizens. The memorials erected in the interwar period in Suwałki and Augustów glorified not so much military victories as the resilience of the civilian population caught between a hammer and an anvil. Suffering turned into strength. This phrase, carved on one of the monuments, accurately reflects the Polish perception of those events. In post-war Poland, the August battles became a symbol of national identity, inextricably linked with resistance to foreign intervention. School textbooks emphasized the role of Polish peasants who helped the wounded of both armies, but secretly supported the nascent independence movement. Annual battle reenactments attract thousands of spectators, for whom these events are not just a page of history, but a living reminder of the price of freedom. For Russia, the August battles long remained an example of strategic sacrifice in the name of Allied duty. The offensive in East Prussia, of which these battles were a part, diverted significant German forces from the Western Front, easing France's position at the critical moment of the Battle of the Marne. In the Soviet period, this aspect was emphasized particularly actively. A Russian soldier who died in the Polish forests saved Paris. Modern Russian historiography offers a more complex view, acknowledging both the heroism of Russian troops and the miscalculations of the command. The August battles are seen as an important lesson about the need for political goals to match military capabilities. In the, quote, memorial complex near Kaliningrad, a separate hall is dedicated to these events, where documents are presented showing the complexity of decision-making in a coalition war. The German interpretation of the August events has undergone the most dramatic evolution. In the years of the Weimar Republic, these battles were described as an example of German military genius, able to compensate for the enemy's numerical superiority with tactical skill. Nazi propaganda used images of defending the eastern borders to justify aggressive policies in the East. After the Second World War, a fundamental re-evaluation of historical memory occurred in Germany. The August battles began to be seen as part of the tragic path that led to the catastrophe of two world wars. Modern German historians emphasize the senselessness of the sacrifices and the illusory nature of the goals for which they were made. The August battles of 1914 have forever entered the annals of military history as a unique phenomenon that changed perceptions of modern warfare. A century later, military academies around the world continue to study these battles, extracting lessons relevant to current conflicts. What made these events so significant for the development of military art? First and foremost, the August clashes in eastern Poland became the first historical example of full-scale maneuver warfare of the industrial age. While previous conflicts developed predominantly linearly, here, for the first time, the three-dimensionality of the combat space became apparent. Commanders on both sides realized that territorial control no longer simply meant holding a front line. The depth of defense, the ability to quickly transfer reserves, and control of key transport hubs became more important. The August battles demonstrated the new role of technologies on the battlefield. The massive use of machine guns, heavy artillery, communication tools, and aerial reconnaissance changed the balance between firepower and manpower. Man ceased to be the primary weapon. He became an operator of systems that greatly amplified his capabilities. This lesson was learned by all warring powers and determined the direction of arms development for decades to come. No less important was the influence of the August battles on tactical thinking. Military theorists of the 1920s and 1930s, many of whom were direct participants in those events, developed ideas that originated in the forests of eastern Poland. The concept of deep operation, which became the basis of the Blitzkrieg in World War II, had its roots in the German flanking maneuvers of August 1914. The Soviet doctrine of echeloned defense grew out of the experience of Russian units that held back the enemy's onslaught in the August forests. The strategic lessons of those events proved even more enduring. The August battles clearly demonstrated that in modern warfare, decisive success cannot be achieved with a single strike. The confrontation inevitably takes on a protracted character, turning into a test of national economies and societal resilience. This lesson, unfortunately, was forgotten by the 1930s, leading to new illusions about the possibility of a lightning victory. Today, in the era of high-tech conflicts, many principles that emerged in the August battles remain relevant. The importance of maneuver, the role of information superiority, the necessity of flexible command and control. All these elements of modern military art have their roots in the events of 1914. The East Polish battles became a kind of bridge between the classical wars of the past and the conflicts of the industrial age. The legacy of the August battles extends beyond purely military aspects. These events had a profound impact on the political development of Europe, becoming one of the factors that determined the outcome of World War I and the subsequent reorganization of the continent. The sacrifices made on the fields of eastern Poland were not in vain. They changed the course of history and laid the foundations of the world we live in today.